Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? She sat at the far end, shoulders square, eyes on a map pinned to the wall, but no one looked her way. A dozen conversations crisscrossed the room. Stories of deployments, jokes in half-muttered voices, the kind of laughter that comes easy among people who think they already know who belongs and who doesn't. And in their eyes, she didn't. It had started weeks earlier in a dusty recruitment office where the air smelled faintly of old coffee and printer ink. She'd walked in wearing jeans, a flannel shirt, and the kind of determined expression you didn't fake. The recruiter glanced up from his desk, his voice casual, almost amused. "Do you have a program for people who can shoot over a mile?" The question stopped in mid-sentence. He set down his pen, looked her over with the faint smirk of someone convinced they knew. "The ending to the story before it began. We've got the Army Sniper School," he said. "But that's not for the faint of heart." Or girls, usually that sentence stuck to her like cold metal in winter. Not for girls. She didn't argue. She didn't tell him about the winters in Montana where the wind cut through layers like paper, where she learned to slow her breath and squeeze a trigger without flinching. She didn't tell him about shooting coyotes across snowfields, gauging distance with nothing but instinct and patience. She just nodded, took the paperwork, and applied. Boot camp was predictable. The grind, the heat, the shouting. She blended in, kept quiet, respected the chain of command. But during rifle qualification week, she shattered expectations so cleanly it left instructors staring at the score sheets in disbelief. Perfect scores, not just hitting targets, grouping them within 2 inches under pressure. The whispers started then, not all of them friendly. Some thought it was a fluke. Some thought she'd been given special treatment. Others just watched, trying to decide whether she was lucky or dangerous. She was immediately flagged for advanced marksmanship training at Fort Benning, Georgia. She stood out for all the wrong reasons. Young, female, no combat experience. The others had seen war, carried scars. She carried nothing but a duffel bag and the quiet certainty that she belonged. Whisperers followed her. Some doubted she could even lift the M2010 rifle, let alone master it. They learned quickly. Her instructor started calling her Ghost Wolf, not because she was aggressive, but because she was silent, calculated, always watching. She moved through forests like mist, disappeared into brush, and when the shot came, it was untraceable. She didn't miss, but being the best didn't mean being accepted. At night, the jokes came, the pranks, the casual comments about affirmative action, the questions about whether she was just there to prove a point. She never reacted. Instead, she woke earlier than the rest, ran farther, trained longer, let her bullets speak. During a live training exercise simulating combat under stress, she hit every target, including 2 moving vehicles, at extreme range. The others celebrated when they passed. She didn't. She cleaned her rifle, checked her logbook, and asked, "When's the next scenario?" By graduation, the skepticism had turned to silence. She'd broken records without ever raising her voice, without chasing recognition. The Army had noticed. Within months, she was handpicked by a special reconnaissance and sniper detachment attached to a Tier 1 Special Forces unit. It was rare, almost unheard of, for someone so new to be trusted with live missions of that magnitude. But she wasn't like anyone else. Her shot groupings, wing call accuracy, and terrain reading were Tier 1 rated. She was given advanced gear, a modified bolt-action rifle customized for extreme range, experimental optics, and the call sign, Whisper 3, fitting for someone whose kills arrived before the sound of the gunshot did. No one whispered doubts now. They whispered her name. But under the growing reputation, she stayed the same quiet girl from Montana. She called her father when she could, kept her medals in a shoebox, wrote in a leather-bound journal after every mission, not to boast, but to learn, "I'm not here to be famous." She told her team once, "I'm here because every shot matters." No one knew how prophetic that would be, because in the high mountains of northern Afghanistan, she would soon face a shot so far, so unreal. Even the most seasoned commanders would call it impossible. The road from elite sniper to commander was never smooth, not for anyone. For her, it was steeper, every step taken under the weight of unspoken doubt. She had the top scores. She had the skill. But skill didn't always translate to respect. In combat, precision earned survival. But in camp, politics and tradition carried more weight. At Forward Operating Base Valor, Afghanistan, she was assigned to Task Force Raven, a unit for deep reconnaissance, intelligence capture, and surgical strikes. Veterans filled the roster, men who'd seen the worst and walked back alive. She was new, female, in their eyes, untested. She arrived with her gear packed perfectly. No swagger, no small talk, just silence and observation. "Who's the girl?" someone muttered when she walked into the staging tent. "Sniper." The team sergeant replied, "The new Ghost Wolf." Some laughed, others didn't. Her first mission wasn't high risk. Overwatch for a supply convoy moving through a smuggling corridor. She and her spotter, Sergeant Lucas Cole, took position on a ridgeline before dawn. The landscape was still, the air sharp. She scanned through her scope for patterns. Disturbed brush, unnatural shapes, glints of metal. Then she saw it, a shimmer behind a ridge. Barely there. "Vehicle," she whispered. "Hostile looks like they're setting up an RPG." Her call rerouted the convoy within minutes. A drone confirmed it. 3 armed men and a launcher. That one decision stopped the massacre. The laughter stopped too over the next weeks. Mission after mission. She proved herself without fanfare. She tracked movement through mirages, disabled fleeing vehicles with precision tire shots, neutralized rooftop snipers before her team had even located them. What made her truly dangerous wasn't just her aim. It was her calm under fire. She didn't flinch. When chaos erupted, she breathed in rhythm, whispered data to Cole, and fired without second-guessing. But even then, acceptance had limits. When the team captain was injured during a night raid, protocol dictated she should assume command of sniper operations. Instead, a senior operator blocked it. "She's good," he said. "Real good. But command? She's not one of us." She didn't argue, didn't push, just kept showing up, staying sharp, executing with precision. But leadership noticed, and one night, the directive came down from high command. She would lead the next high-value reconnaissance operation. The target was a warlord, a shadow figure responsible for ambushes, weapons trafficking, and funding extremist cells. The compound was high in the Hindu Kush, beyond drone range, too risky for direct assault. The mission: deep insertion, high altitude, no support, just patience, eyes, and a perfect shot. She was handpicked. When the announcement came, the room went quiet. No cheers, no applause, just the weight of what it meant. Cole gave her a nod. That night, she studied maps for hours, memorizing terrain, wind patterns, and fallback routes. The compound sat at 11,000 feet, surrounded by jagged ridges and steep valleys. The nearest extraction point was 15 miles away on foot. "This is a one-shot mission," she told Cole. "We get one chance." They moved out before sunrise 3 days later. Snow, shale, thin air, avoiding patrols. Distant artillery like thunder rolling through the mountains. After 2 days of climbing and crawling, they reached a narrow plateau. Through her scope, she saw the target, tall, surrounded by guards, always moving. She began calculating. Distance: 3,560 meters. Crosswind: 14 knots. Elevation drop: severe. Bullet flight time: over 7 seconds. Cole stared. "This is insane." "Not impossible," she whispered, and then she waited. Hours passed. The cold bit into her bones. Her cheek pressed against frozen steel. She didn't move. Numbers and angles looped in her head like a mantra. Back at base, the commander watched satellite feeds and shook his head. "If she hits that," he muttered, "I'll eat my boots." No. One believed it could be done. No one except her. The wind had a voice in the Hindu Kush, low, constant, and cold enough to bite the skin. It swept across the ridge where she lay, crawling over her like invisible fingers, tugging at her hair, slipping under her collar. She didn't flinch, Erica. Lane had been in position for 18 hours. Her world was reduced to the narrow tunnel of a Schmidt and Bender scope, the crosshairs floating steady over a distant balcony more than 2 miles away. The compound below was carved into the mountainside, a mix of old stone and steel, its walls painted in sun-faded tan, its guard towers bristling with armed men. Her spotter, Sergeant Lucas Cole, sat a foot to her left, wrapped in layers, breath fogging in the cold. The two had barely spoken since taking position. In sniper work, stillness wasn't just a tactic, it was survival. Cole finally broke the silence. "You know, this is damn near science fiction, right?" She didn't answer. Her breathing was slow, deliberate, matched to the rhythm of her heartbeat. "I'm serious," he went on. 3,560 meters. Bullet flight times over 7 seconds. You'll have to correct for curvature of the Earth, spin drift, thermal layering. Hell, even the sun angles against you. Her eyes stayed fixed to the glass. Her mind kept running the math, wind, humidity, barometric pressure. Each factor was a piece of a fragile equation that, if even slightly off, could turn a perfect shot into a meaningless miss. The rifle beneath her hands wasn't just a weapon. It was an extension of her, a custom-modified Chetak intervention, chambered in 408. Its 30-inch barrel tuned for ultra-long-range precision. The stock felt like it had grown into her shoulder. Every adjustment to the windage and elevation knobs was small enough to be measured in breaths. Cole's voice dropped. "You sure you can do this?" She whispered back, "No, but I believe I can." And that was enough. The day wore on. Shadows crawled across the compound as the sun dipped toward the western ridge. The target, Ismail Kadir, a warlord whose name had bled across countless intelligence reports, was elusive. Always moving, always shielded. Then, at precisely 1837 hours, he appeared, tall, broad-shouldered, black tactical vest over desert robes. He stepped into the courtyard with 2 armed guards at his back. He stopped at the balcony's edge, scanning the horizon as if he sensed something in the air. But not what mattered. Cole tensed. "That's your moment. You good?" She didn't move. Her lips moved in a quiet checklist. Wind, 30 knots, 45 degrees cross, 26 mils left. Elevation hold, 38 mils. Humidity, 11%. Pressure, 875 millibars. Zero drift, slight mirage. Firing solution set. Cole swallowed. His voice was almost a whisper. "You really think?" The question never finished. Her fingers slid to the trigger. She exhaled. Heartbeat slowed. The crosshairs steadied. Then, like a whisper across time, she squeezed. The crack echoed across the mountains. Swallowed quickly by the wind, the bullet left the barrel at over 3,000 feet per second, tearing into open air. For 2 seconds, it fought nothing but distance. Then gravity began to drag it down. The Earth's spin nudged it sideways, and the cold, thin air clawed at its speed. She didn't blink, didn't shift, just counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. On the 7-second stillness, through the scope, she saw the target jerk violently backward, his body folded like cloth, his head snapping against the railing before he dropped out of view. Guards scattered. Dust rose. The courtyard erupted. In shouts, Cole stared into his spotting scope, blinking hard. No freaking way. "Scan," she said calmly. He shifted the reticle, scanning for movement. The target's thermal signature glowed for a moment, then began to fade. Rapid temperature drop in the chest cavity. No pulse, no movement. Confirmed, Cole whispered. Target neutralized. She exhaled, slow and steady, as if the shot had been nothing more than a training drill. Log it, she said. Let's move. They broke down the rifle in less than 3 minutes, the long barrel disappearing into a padded case. Every shell casing was recovered. Every footprint was blurred with a brush of snow. The sun was already sinking behind the ridge as they started the descent toward the extraction point 15 kilometers south. The path was a brutal mix of ice and jagged stone. Her muscles burned from lying prone so long, her elbows stiff, her spine screaming from the cold. But she moved like the terrain itself was a familiar enemy. Cole kept glancing at her. You realize what you just did? He asked. I made the shot. No, Erica, he said, his voice tight with awe. You made the shot. Nobody's ever done that, especially not under live conditions. That's not the part that matters, she replied without looking at him. Then what does? That no one else has to die because of him. By the time they reached base, night had swallowed the valley. Command was waiting. The air in the operations tent was thick with silence when she stepped in. She set the rifle case on the table. Target neutralized, coordinates logged, photos in the recon drive. Colonel Greaves, the task force commander, studied her for a moment. You understand what you just did, Lane? I made the shot, sir. He shook his head, almost smiling. That wasn't a shot. That was a chapter in military history. She just nodded. With respect, sir, I need sleep. Hours later, she sat on the roof of the barracks with a tin cup of black coffee. Cole joined her, his face still carrying the disbelief of the day. You should be proud, he said. I'm tired. That shot's going to be talked about for years. She looked at him, her voice flat. It shouldn't be about the shot. It should be about the reason. Below them, the base buzzed with activity. Radio chatter still hummed in the distance. Somewhere in those mountains, a ripple of confusion and fear had begun to spread among enemy lines. A man feared for his brutality was gone. Erased from a distance his own guards couldn't comprehend. But here, in the cold Afghan night, Erica Lane felt only stillness. The kind that comes after a storm, not calm, exactly, but the heavy pause before whatever comes next. The base woke before dawn, but it wasn't the usual hum of generators and the clank of gear. It was the whisper, the shot. Everyone had heard about it by the time the first trays of mess hall coffee were poured. No one crowded her. No one dared. They just watched from a distance, their voices lowered, like speaking too loudly might somehow disturb whatever she was. By sunrise, the kill had been verified. Satellite imagery, drone footage, biometric scans. There was no doubt. Ismail Qadir was dead. One bullet, one target. A record broken. Erica didn't speak about it. She was in the armory, stripping her rifle down to the last pin, cleaning each part with slow, deliberate movements, brushing carbon from the firing pin, running oiled cloth through the barrel. Younger snipers drifted in and out, pretending to be busy, but really just stealing glances at her. It wasn't hero worship. It was something else, the silent acknowledgement of a moment that had crossed into legend in the operations tent. Analysts dissected the shot like surgeons, weather patterns, drop arc, spin drift, bullet speed, angle of fire. Every calculation confirmed the same thing. The shot wasn't luck. It was perfect. A kill at 3,560 meters, under live conditions. At high altitude, with no wind cover, when she was summoned to the briefing tent, she found Colonel Greaves standing with senior command. He rose when she entered, a small gesture, but one that didn't go unnoticed. Staff Sergeant Lane. He began. We've confirmed your shot with high-level clearance. The man you neutralized was responsible for over 200 deaths, including civilians and American personnel. That single bullet disrupted an entire insurgent command chain. She said nothing. The Pentagon has formally recognized this mission as a strategic success of the highest tier. You're being recommended for the Silver Star. She blinked once. Thank you, sir. Is that all? He studied her, half smiling. Yes, Lane, that's all. By the end of the week, word had leaked. Defense briefings whispered it first. Then the military blogs picked it up. Unnamed female sniper in Afghanistan makes longest confirmed kill in U.S. history. The speculation began. Could a shot like that even be made? Was the distance real? Were the conditions exaggerated? Some experts pored over terrain maps, reverse engineering the angle and ballistics. Others dismissed it as propaganda. On forums, arguments burned for days, lucky fluke or precision mastery. Those who knew stayed quiet. Let the world wonder. Erica avoided it all. She declined interviews, refused photo ops. She didn't post online. Her silence only made the rumors grow. Instead, she kept training, kept teaching. Young recruits arrived wide-eyed, waiting for her to speak about the shot. She never did. One morning, a trainee asked, "What's it like, making a shot like that?" She paused. It's like throwing a paper airplane in a hurricane and landing it on a coin. Her voice stayed level. And knowing that if you miss, someone dies. The kid didn't ask again. But the impact went beyond ballistics for decades. Combat sniping had been dominated by men, not by law, but by culture. Few women made it through sniper school. Fewer led teams. None had done what she had. Suddenly, barriers looked fragile. Cadets at West Point quoted her name. NATO sniper schools requested case studies of her mission. And as myths tend to do, hers drew fire. A viral blog post claimed her wind correction had been computer-assisted. Unfair advantage. Another said she was lucky, like winning the lottery. A retired general told a reporter. One shot doesn't make a warrior. But others, the ones who knew, pushed back. A Marine Scout sniper with 3 tours went on record. I don't care if it was luck, fate, or math from the gods. You don't lie prone for hours at 11,000 feet. In freezing wind, calculate spin drift, and pull that trigger without nerves of steel. That's not luck. That's war made into art. She never replied to any of it. Her focus stayed where it had always been. Preparation. Yet the weight of that bullet followed her everywhere. At every base, eyes tracked her rifle case. New teams went quiet when she entered. Commanders gave her more room to speak. Her reputation didn't arrive with a fanfare. It whispered. Late one night, sitting in the barracks with Cole, she finally said what no one expected. I didn't want the kill, she murmured. Cole looked up. You think that shot bought peace? For some, she said. For others, it just gave them time. Not long after, the report was declassified. Her name went public. News stations splashed her photo across headlines. American woman sniper makes historic kill. Overnight, she became a household name. She was flown back to the States for the Silver Star ceremony at the Pentagon. Cameras flashed, politicians angled for photos, generals saluted. She stood at attention in her dress blues, eyes fixed somewhere beyond the marble floors. Behind closed doors, the offers poured in. A book deal, a documentary, a weapons line with her name. She refused them all. I didn't pull the trigger for money, she told her commanding officer, but fame has its own gravity. Invitations stacked up. Talk shows, veteran galas, even the White House. A Hollywood agent tracked down her parents in Montana. That one ended quickly. Back on base, she tried to return to routine, mooring PT. Gear checks, night drills, but routine had changed. Everywhere she went, whispers followed. Some looked at her with awe, others with envy, and some, especially older officers, with quiet skepticism. She's a one-shot wonder. One captain muttered after she declined an award dinner. They didn't understand. She wasn't chasing applause. She was chasing mastery. One night during an advanced recon exercise in North Carolina, she led her team through swamps for 72 hours. No sleep, constant movement. Simulated insurgent threats. At 3 a.m., Cole found her kneeling in ankle-deep water, calibrating her scope by moonlight. "You ever think about the shot?" he asked. "Every day. Regret it?" "No, but I understand its cost now." He tilted his head. "The attention?" She didn't answer, but the truth gnawed at her. The one bullet had changed more than the course of a war. It had changed her life, her privacy, the way the army looked at her. It had changed the way people looked at themselves. Some of her own team started second-guessing her orders. Not openly, but with pauses, hesitations. One junior sniper challenged her during a training brief. "With all due respect, ma'am, you're famous for a shot most people call impossible. Are you saying the rest of us should chase miracles too?" She didn't blink. "No, you don't chase miracles. You prepare so relentlessly that when the moment comes, you're the one who doesn't flinch." The room went silent, but in the halls of command, her fame had started to worry people. Public interest was snowballing. Media pressure was growing. A defense official quietly suggested moving her to a non-combat role for security reasons. She declined. "I'm not finished," she told her CO. "There's still work to be done." He looked at her a long time. "After what you've done, you'll never deploy without someone somewhere recognizing you. That makes you a target." "I've always been a target," she said. "The only difference now is they know I shoot back." The mountains hadn't changed. That was the first thing she noticed when the plane touched down and the long drive took her home. Montana's ridges still rolled under a sky that looked too wide for any one person to carry. The wind still smelled of pine and cold earth. In the thin light of early morning, her father was waiting on the porch with a steaming mug of coffee in his hand. "You broke the world open," he said, by way of greeting. She gave him a faint smile. "It didn't break. It just woke up." They walked the old trails that wound through the timber, past frozen streams and moss-covered boulders. It felt like stepping into a life she had only imagined in the dust and fire of other continents. Here, no one asked about coordinates, or windage or ballistic coefficients. No one whispered about the shot. Somewhere deep in the woods, she stopped. The snow crunched under her boots as she knelt and pulled something from her pocket, a small brass casing, its surface dulled by the months it had spent wrapped in cloth at the bottom of her gear bag. The casing, from that shot, no marker, no inscription, just a hollow reminder of a moment that had followed her across oceans. She dug a shallow hole in the frozen ground, laid the casing inside, and covered it without ceremony. "It was never about the bullet," she murmured. Her father didn't ask. Back in her units, she didn't slow down. If anything, she pushed harder. This time, her training wasn't just for herself. She began rewriting sniper protocols, making them sharper, leaner, more realistic. She created stress drills that simulated the crushing weight of long Overwatch missions. She spent hours coaching female recruits, not just on shooting, but on surviving the quiet battles, the doubt, the whispers, the subtle ways a room could close in around you. She never spoke about the shot unless it served a lesson. "You don't train to be famous," she told one young sniper. "You train so you're ready when no one else is." Word spread through the ranks that if Erica Lane was teaching you, you paid attention. She had no interest in building an image. But an image was building anyway. They started calling her the silent trigger. In Kabul, a mural appeared on a cracked concrete wall. Her silhouette, rifle in hand, hair braided under her helmet. The artist had painted her eyes locked through a scope. Beneath it, in Pashto, was a line. "She sees from afar but stands close." No one claimed the work. It wasn't official. But the image began to spread. Bootleg posters showed up in markets. Girls copied it into their notebooks. Local militia groups passed it around as a warning, a ghost of fear. In the U.S., the debates were louder. Was she a hero? A dangerous icon? Was this the kind of story that inspired or the kind that glorified killing? Pundits argued over her on television panels. Academics dissected her in journals. Politicians tried to stand near her name like it might transfer some kind of shine. She stayed where she had always been, in the shadows, in the field, doing the work. But the war didn't care about reputations. One night, near the Pakistan border, her convoy hit an IED. The explosion lifted the Humvee 5 feet into the air. Tore metal like paper, she was thrown against the door. Her vision swimming, ears ringing. 2 soldiers were badly hurt, one bleeding heavily from the leg, the other with a jagged wound across his chest. Erica didn't think. She dragged them both clear of the wreckage, tied tourniquets with quick, precise movements, then laid down suppressive fire until evac arrived. A shard of shrapnel tore into her shoulder. She didn't mention it until they were back at base. A young medic scolded her. "You could have bled out. They were bleeding worse," she replied. They nominated her for the Distinguished Service Cross. She turned it down, put the funds into their rehab. She told the brass, "There, the reason I'm still here, it wasn't a refusal out of humility. It was a refusal born of focus." Her influence was stretching beyond borders now. NATO invited her to speak to their sniper command teams in Germany. She agreed, not as a celebrity, but as a teacher. No shot matters if the mission isn't clear. She told the assembled room. Your bullet doesn't just travel distance. It carries weight, political, moral, human. If you don't respect that, you shouldn't carry a rifle. A British SAS sniper later told her it was the first time he'd heard someone speak about lethality with humility. Back home, her words began finding their way into doctrine. Training academies added excerpts from her field logs. Instructors quoted her decision-making frameworks. And something unexpected happened. More young women started applying for elite marksmanship and scout roles. When asked why, many gave the same answer. If Erica Lane can do it, maybe I can too. She didn't see herself as a trailblazer. One night, after a long training op, Cole sat with her by the fire pit. You ever think about how much has changed because of that shot? She didn't look up. Change doesn't come from one bullet. He smirked. No, but that one moved the target. Her gaze drifted to the flames. She remembered the weight of the rifle, the perfect stillness, the breath she held. The firestorm that came after. I didn't want to be a symbol. She said finally, I just wanted to be useful. You were, he said. You still are. Maybe more now than ever. The next morning, a knock came at her door. A young private handed her a letter with no return address. Inside was a short message in shaky English. Because of you, I want to protect, not hide. My mother says you are danger, but I think you are shield. Thank you for showing us we can look forward. I hope to be brave like you. It was signed. Layla, age 12, Kabul. She read it twice, then folded it carefully and slid it into the same inner pocket she kept her range card in the day of the shot. That afternoon, she walked into the sniper training compound and erased the day's schedule from the board. No shooting today, she told the recruits. Confused glances met her. Today's about restraint, about the decision not to take the shot, about the space between the crosshairs and your conscience. The range stayed silent because Erica Lane wasn't just a woman who made the impossible shot anymore. She was the one who understood its cost and was willing to teach others how to carry it without breaking. The war didn't end, not in the desert, not in the mountains, and certainly not in Erica Lane's mind. Years passed, and she kept moving. Deployments, training cycles, rotations through forward bases where the air always smelled faintly of diesel and dust. She had survived IED's ambush and the invisible weight of public expectation. Her name had become legend, passed quietly among special operations units, studied in classrooms she would never enter. But legends, she realized, had limits. People didn't want the whole story. They wanted the headline, the shot, the glory, and she was tired of being a headline. It came to her one night, lying awake in her bunk after another day of drills. She'd spent hours walking trainees through urban overwatch techniques, correcting their posture, teaching them how to manage wind shear between buildings. And yet, the moment she stepped out of the training yard, someone had slipped a copy of a magazine into her hand, her own face staring back under the words, "The deadliest woman alive." She didn't feel deadly. She felt hollow. The decision wasn't impulsive. She weighed it like she weighed every shot, factoring angles, timing, the wind of public opinion, the drop of opportunity. One morning, without fanfare, she handed in her resignation, honorably, quietly. No press conference, no parade, just a single signature. A handshake with her CO, and the knowledge that she was walking away from the only world she'd ever known. She didn't vanish. She simply stepped off the battlefield. And then the silence hit. For years, her days had been measured in operations. Briefings, training runs, weapon checks. Now, in Montana, her mornings were defined by the slow rise of light over pine ridges. She built herself a small log cabin near a frozen lake. No electricity, no phone. Just wood smoke curling into the cold air and the sound of wind in the trees. But silence, she learned, speaks. Veterans began finding her, not in person at first. In letters, dozens, then hundreds. From snipers, medics, infantrymen, engineers. They didn't want advice on shooting. They wanted to be heard. Many confessed they couldn't sleep. Some admitted guilt they couldn't name. Others described a rage that wouldn't burn out. A few wrote plainly, "I don't know how much longer I can keep going." Erica read every letter, and then she started. Writing back, she wrote the way she had spoken on the range. Precise, measured, honest. She didn't preach. She didn't sugarcoat. She told the truth about fear, about the weight of surviving when others didn't, about the way the battlefield never really lets you go. Months later, a former ranger named Ellis drove all the way from Arizona to find her cabin. He didn't knock right away, just sat on the porch in silence until she stepped outside. "You stopped me from ending it," he said simply. "Just thought you should know." She nodded once. No words needed. They watched the sun set together, the lake turning gold in the fading light. That's when she knew her real mission had just begun. It started small, a weekend retreat for 4 veterans. They stayed in tents on the property, cooked meals over open fires, and spent hours in the woods. There was no talk of war unless they wanted it. No drills, no force therapy, just the steady rhythm of living in the moment. From there, it grew into something she named the Far Sight Project. It wasn't about rifles anymore. It was about precision of living. The retreat offered archery instead of marksmanship, deep breath focus training instead of overwatch, writing therapy instead of after-action reports. She brought in a falconer to teach patience and trust. Every exercise carried the same principles she'd lived by as a sniper. Focus, clarity, restraint. It worked. Dozens came, then hundreds. Some were broken in ways they couldn't describe. Some were angry, some were numb. Many left changed, not cured. She didn't promise that, but finally seen. One soldier wrote in the retreat's guest book, "I aimed at death. She showed me how to aim at life again." The shot that had once defined her in headlines was still being studied in military classrooms, but she'd stopped answering interview requests long ago. One spring, a journalist from a national magazine hiked to her cabin. She was splitting wood in flannel and boots when he approached. "Do you think that shot defined your life?" he asked. She balanced the axe on her shoulder. "No, that shot showed the world what I could do. What I do now shows who I am." The story ran with the headline, "The woman who could kill from 2 miles away now teaches men how to heal." Some critics called it soft. Others called it the bravest thing she'd ever done. Years turned over quietly in Montana. The war changed faces. Soldiers rotated in and out. Some sent letters. Some returned in person. Their steps heavy, but their eyes sharper than when they'd arrived. And then, one envelope appeared in her mailbox that stopped her cold. The handwriting was familiar. The though she'd only seen it once. In blocky, uncertain English, on a letter years before, Layla, Kabul, now 19. Layla had earned a scholarship to study international law. She had become a voice for displaced girls in war zones. Her letter ended with, "Because of you, I learned to look forward and to fight without a gun." Erica set the paper down and pressed her hands over her eyes. For the first time in years, she cried. That night, she walked to the lake alone. The stars were sharp, the water black as polished glass. She stood there a long time, boots in the frost, breath clouding the air. No rifle, no target, no enemy. Only the understanding that she had carried the weight of a single bullet long enough, and had finally found a way to pass on something lighter. Winter came early to Montana that year. Snow covered the lake by November, the kind of deep freeze that locked the world in stillness. The retreat cabins were shuttered for the season, their chimneys cold. Most of the veterans who had come that summer had gone home, some with lighter steps, some with phone numbers scrawled on scraps of paper. The kind of connections you can call at 3 in the morning without having to explain why. Erica stayed. She liked the quiet months. The Farsight Project had grown into something that almost ran itself, a rotation of mentors, former service members who had gone through the program and returned to help others. Some taught archery, others led hikes through the timber. Few handled the paperwork she still hated, but the core remained hers. The philosophy that precision wasn't just about where you aimed, but why, occasionally, she'd be invited to speak at universities or veteran conferences. She'd stand in front of a room, hands loose at her sides, and talk not about the shot, but about the space between pulling the trigger and deciding not. 2. She spoke about patience, about the discipline to act only when action was necessary. One evening after such a talk, a young Marine approached her. "Ma'am," he said, "I saw you on the news when I was 12. I joined because of you. But what you said tonight, it's making me rethink what I want to do with that." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Good. That means you're paying attention." Back at the cabin, her life was measured in smaller moments. Splitting wood, tracking elk through the snow, reading letters from veterans in places she'd never been. Norway, Chile, Kenya. The Farsight name had traveled farther than she ever expected. But something still lingered. In the bottom drawer of her desk was a small locked box. Inside was the casing from the 3,560-meter shot. She had kept it all these years, wrapped in a scrap of cloth, its brass dulled but intact. She rarely opened the box. When she did, it was never for long. The casing was heavy in her palm. Though she knew it didn't weigh more than a few ounces, it carried too much history to be light. One night, after reading a letter from a young Afghan woman who had escaped a forced marriage and credited Erica's story for her courage, she knew it was time. At dawn, she packed a thermos of coffee, strapped on snowshoes, and began the climb up the ridge behind her cabin. The trail wound between tall pines, there, branches bending under the weight of snow. The air was so still she could hear her own breath. It took her 3 hours to reach the peak, a place she'd come to many times before, though never with the casing. From up here, the lake below looked like a coin of silver glass. The mountains rolled away into the horizon, their shadows long in the winter sun. She knelt in the snow and dug a small hole. The brass was cold in her hand. She turned it over once, twice, remembering the smell of gunpowder, the crack of the rifle, the long silence of those 7 seconds. She remembered the guards scattering, the dust rising in the courtyard, Cole's stunned voice in her ear. She pressed the casing into the earth, covered it, smoothed the snow flat, not out of shame, not to forget, but to mark the chapter closed. She sat there for a while, sipping coffee, watching her breath curl away into the air. The wind picked up, whispering through the pines, carrying no scent of cordite or fear, only snow and sap and the faint promise of another season. When she descended, she felt lighter, the work at the Far Side Project continued. Some weeks brought veterans fresh from deployments, still vibrating with the unspent adrenaline of war. Others brought men and women who had been home for decades, but couldn't shake the feeling that they were still there. She had a rule for everyone. The first day, no talking about the past unless you wanted to. The forest didn't care about rank or records. One former Navy corpsman spent an entire week carving a small wooden hawk. On the last day, he handed it to her. "It's you," he said. "Eyes forward, quiet, waiting. You don't scare people into standing taller. You make them want to." She kept the hawk on the mantle. Her reputation outside the retreat shifted over the years. The war stories faded from headlines. The shots still appeared in military textbooks, in ballistics lectures, in whispered conversations among snipers. But in the public eye, she was no longer the woman who killed from 2 miles away. She was the veteran who teaches others to breathe again. She liked that better. Sometimes, a young reporter would try to bait her back into the old narrative. "Do you ever miss it? The field, the missions?" Her answer was always the same. "I miss my team, not the war." The truth was, she didn't need the scope anymore to see clearly. Years after she buried the casing, she climbed that ridge again. Not with a rifle, not with gear, just with a thermos of coffee and the wooden hawk. She set it down on the snow above the place she'd hidden the brass. A small mark for no one but herself. Then she turned back toward the cabin, the sun warming her face despite the cold. She had once been defined by how far she could shoot. Now, she was defined by how deeply she could see. By the time the Far Side Project passed its 10th year, Erica had stopped keeping count of the people who'd come through its gates. Some stayed for a weekend, some for months. Many never came back physically, but they wrote, and their letters painted a map of lives altered, trajectories shifted, choices made in moments that might otherwise have gone dark. She didn't measure success in numbers. She measured it in the quiet moments. The Marine who, on his last day, sat on the porch and drank coffee without fidgeting for the first time in years. The Army medic who could finally walk into a crowded store without scanning every face. The Afghan interpreter who spent 3 nights sleeping under the stars because it felt safe here. Her work reached farther than she ever saw firsthand. Veterans who had trained with her began starting their own small programs, some in rural woods like hers, others in city parks, on farms, even in abandoned warehouses repurposed as safe spaces. They carried the same principles: patience, discipline, and the deliberate act of living with precision. She didn't need to be there for their successes. That was the point. And yet, every so often, someone would return. One cold March afternoon, Cole appeared at the edge of the clearing, his beard grayer, his shoulders broader with the weight of years. She was repairing a section of the dock that had splintered over the winter. "You're a hard woman to find," he said. "You didn't try that hard," she replied without looking up. He grinned, still a terrible liar. They talked until the light faded, a fire crackling between them. Cole had left the Army too, but not without scars, the kind you couldn't see. He'd tried the city for a while, then found himself restless, adrift. "I've been thinking," he said. "You've got your project here. What if we set up something like this closer to the guys still active? Somewhere they can go before they break?" She considered it. Prevention instead of recovery. Exactly. That spring, they found a piece of land near a military base in the Carolinas and built what they called the Forward Camp, a sister site to Far Side, focused on transition, on catching soldiers before they hit the spiral. Erica visited twice a year, running training on restraint and precision, but mostly letting Cole take the lead. It felt good to hand things over. Her name still traveled quietly in military circles. Younger snipers would sometimes arrive at Far Side with the same wide-eyed look she'd seen a decade earlier in recruits. Most had studied the shot in school. Some admitted it was the reason they'd picked up a rifle in the first place. She told them the same thing she'd told everyone. You don't live for that one shot. You live for the moments after, and you make sure they're worth it. The letters from Layla kept coming. Now studying abroad, she wrote about law school, about advocacy for girls in war zones, about testifying before committees that barely understood the lives they were legislating. She always ended the same way. Because of you, I stand. Erica kept every letter. In the wider world, war shifted again. New conflicts replaced the old ones. In headlines, her name didn't come up as much. That suited her fine. The fewer people trying to turn her into a symbol, the better still. Every once in a while, a journalist would track her down, usually someone young, eager, believing they'd found a forgotten story. They'd ask about the shot, and she'd tell them less and less each year, not because it hurt to talk about, but because she'd said everything that needed saying. The truth was, that day in the mountains didn't feel like the defining moment anymore. It was just one piece in a long chain of decisions, some harder, some quieter, some no one would ever know about. She kept her days simple, wood to split, paths to clear, letters to answer. Mornings began with the lake in its different moods. Glassy in summer, shivering under wind in autumn, locked solid in winter. Nights ended with a single lamp burning and the smell of cedar in the air. And yet, even in that quiet, the world sometimes came to her. One summer, a group of young ROTC cadets arranged a visit as part of their leadership training. She hesitated. She'd never done group work that wasn't veteran-based, but agreed. They spent 3 days in the woods, learning to move silently, to read wind through treetops, to sit still long enough for their breathing to settle into the rhythm of the earth around them. On the last night, one of the cadets asked the question they'd all been circling. Do you ever wish you'd missed? The fire popped. She watched the sparks rise before answering. No, because missing would have meant more dead. But I do wish the world didn't measure people by the worst things they had to do well. No one spoke after that. When they left quietly, like people stepping out of a place that had shifted something inside them. By the time autumn came, Erica could feel her own pace slowing. The cold settled deeper into her bones than it used to. She found herself taking longer to climb the ridge, longer to split the same pile of wood, but she didn't fight it. One crisp October morning, she hiked up to the place where she had buried the casing. The snow hadn't fallen yet, and the ground was dry. She stood over the spot for a long time. The valley spread out below, the lake flashing silver in the low sun. She realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd thought of that day with anything like adrenaline. Now, it felt like a story that had happened to someone else. And maybe, in a way, it had. She turned away, walking back down the trail. Slowly, her breath puffing white in the air, she thought about the people she'd met. The ones who had written, the ones who had stood taller because they'd found a way to carry what they had to carry. That was the legacy worth keeping. The shot had been a chapter. Far Sight was the book. Winter returned to Montana the way it always did, quietly. Then all at once, the lake froze overnight, its glassy surface turning to pale stone. Snow drifted against the cabin walls. The pines wore heavy crowns of white. Erica Lane rose before dawn, as she always had. Old habits never left her. She dressed in layers, lit the wood stove, and poured coffee into a tin mug. The air inside the cabin smelled of cedar and ash. Outside, the world was silent enough to hear the creak of ice settling on the lake. Her days had grown slower. She didn't mind. The veterans still came, though. Not in the numbers they once did. Many were now running their own programs, little outposts of the Far Sight philosophy scattered across the country. She'd watch them grow from afar, sometimes through a phone call, sometimes through a letter signed with a name she remembered from years back. Cole still visited once a year, bringing stories from forward camp. They'd sit by the fire, trading. Fewer words than they used to, but never needing many. He'd leave with a promise to keep the door open for her. Though they both knew she was staying here for good, Lila's letters still arrived, now filled with updates about her work in refugee advocacy. She'd written about testifying before international panels, about facing down men in suits who dismissed her until she spoke, about walking away knowing she'd made them think twice. In one letter, she'd written, "You told me once that every shot matters. I think now you meant every choice." Erica kept that one pinned above her desk. The retreat was quieter in winter, but not empty. A young Navy veteran named Ortiz came to stay for a month, haunted by a blast injury and the guilt of surviving when two others hadn't. He struggled to sleep, pacing the porch at night like a sentry. One morning, she found him sitting on the frozen dock, staring at the snow. She sat beside him, not speaking. Minutes passed before he said, "How do you live with the things you've done?" She thought about the question, about the long years between the mountains of Afghanistan and this frozen lake, about the weight of that brass casing in her palm before she'd buried it. "You don't live with them," she said finally. "You live with what you choose to do after." It was the same advice she'd given herself when she walked away from the uniform. It was the reason Farside existed at all. The weeks passed. Ortiz began sleeping through the night. On the day he left, he shook her hand and said, "You're not what I expected." "Good," she replied. Her life had become that, a series of quiet moments that meant more than anyone watching from the outside could understand. No cameras, no medals, just the steady rhythm of helping people find a way forward. But she knew she wouldn't be here forever. One evening, she took the wooden hawk from her mantle and wrapped it in cloth. The carving had been with her for years, a gift from a corpsman who'd said it was her in another form. She hiked the ridge behind the cabin as the sun set, the sky bleeding orange into the dark. When she reached the place where she'd buried the casing, she knelt and placed the hawk above it. For a long time, she stayed there, watching the wind bend the treetops, listening to the low moan of winter air in the valley. In that moment, it struck her that this spot, this cold, quiet place, held the story of both who she had been and who she'd become. The brass casing and the hawk. Death and protection, precision and patience. She whispered something she hadn't said in years. "It's done." The next morning, she rewrote the schedule for the coming spring, not for herself, but for the others who would run Farsight when she no longer could. She added new exercises, left notes in the margins about teaching not just skill but judgment, and underlined one sentence 3 times. They have to know why, or it means nothing. The months rolled on. The snow melted. The lake turned black, then silver, then blue again. She planted a small garden, something she'd never had the time or patience for before, and then one early summer morning, she stood on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the mist rise off the water. The air was still. Her breath was slow. She thought of the girl in Montana who'd once walked into a recruiter's office and asked if they had a program for someone who could shoot over a mile. She thought of the cold metal of the rifle stock under her cheek, of the long wait on that ridge, of the crack of a single bullet changing the arc of her life. And then she thought of the faces that had come after, the soldiers she'd trained, the veterans she'd walked with through dark woods, the young woman across the ocean who called herself a shield instead of a victim. A gust of wind brushed her cheek. She closed her eyes, felt it pass and let it go, because she knew now the shot had never been the point. The point had been everything that followed that day. She took a walk through the woods without a destination, just moving, breathing, feeling the sun through the leaves. She stopped by the lake as the water caught the light, remembering something her father used to say, sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. She smiled, because she finally understood her life was no longer measured in distance or in records. It was measured in depth, in how deeply she could see, and how far her influence could travel without her ever needing to move. And when she turned back toward the cabin, The wind carried only one thing with it, the soft, unshakable truth that she had done enough. Moral close. Sometimes, dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.